I guess I just like not knowing. That's kind of what interests me about making stuff. Whether or not it's an improvisation or a choreography, I want to not know what it is before, or even at the end, actually. Like, the mystery of it is kind of what interests me most.
Hello, my name is Eline Perez, and you're listening to Are You an Artist? Today's episode is with Seke Chimutengwende, who speaks about dance improvisation, choreography, and not knowing. So let's dive into dance and the unknown with the fantastic Seke right now. Great. So I've written a letter as well for you.
Okay, yeah.
Also to describe your work to the listeners.
Yeah.
I took everything from your website. So
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Dear Seke, I have heard a lot of good things about you since 2021, but I first met you this year in 2024. After seeing your work, It Begins in Darkness. I was impressed by the piece and the movement quality of the dancers. It made me want to work with you. I heard that you were such a good improvisation teacher, but also to invite you in the podcast. My second wish came true, so thank you for being here. You are a choreographer, improviser, movement director, and teacher. In your work, you experiment with collectivity and alternative approaches to authorship and governance, playing with form to shift and question hierarchies. You performed over 70 solo improvisations internationally, collaborated with many artists, and you taught at the school Parts in Brussels, which is where I did my work placement at uni. There is so much more to ask about your work, but I want to start with the first question of this podcast. Seke, are you an artist?
Yes, I am. That's probably not something that I say very often. If somebody was like, what do you do, or who are you? I don't think I would say I'm an artist, but I guess I am an artist. I would probably describe myself as a choreographer, or sometimes I would say I work in dance, or work in performance, or with performance, or in the theatre. Depends who I'm talking to and what I think, what I think they will know. And it also it shifts a little bit because the balance of things that I do changes from year to year. So sometimes I'm doing a lot more of one aspect of my practice. So yeah, when I was in my 20s, I was mainly performing in other people's work. And then, I started performing improvisation, I guess, in 2006, so a couple of years after I graduated. And that was kind of running concurrently with performing in choreography.
And do you remember your first dance memory?
My first dance memory? Well, I don't remember a time when I wasn't dancing. So I was dancing from a very young age. My mum was a dance teacher. She went to Laban.
Oh. So were you going to her classes?
I did. I mean, I didn't do classes with her, but I used to go and watch her teach when I was really little. I used to sit there and watch. And I'm trying to think my very first dance memory. It was probably performing. I used to do performances at home for my family all the time, dressing up and putting music on and performing for sometimes for like an hour. So
you were already doing like a 60 minutes improvisation.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great.
And so I did, and then at school as well, like when I, from primary school, I used to do performances in front of the school and that I made up. Yeah, I think, I don't know the exact first memory, but in a way I sort of don't remember not doing it, if that makes sense.
Yes, it kind of followed you.
What didn't resonate with me until much, much later was going to classes. So I knew about classes because my mum was teaching them, and she sometimes would take me. I remember she took me to a class at the place, like a creative dance class for kids, and she took me to. I remember going to an African dance class, and I just didn't really. It didn't sort of do much for me. I felt like I don't understand why I would follow somebody else's.
Yeah, so I'm very curious about that because you mentioned in the other podcast you did
Right.
how you find very difficult to remember set
Yeah, I mean,
material.
I did at the time. I mean, I probably do now as well. Yeah, when I was a kid, anyway, and in my teens, yeah, I would sort of go to a class, and I sort of felt like I can't. It's like a struggle to remember the sequences.
I've
So
always struggled with the same issue
yeah,
actually,
right,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And then for auditions it's impossible because I
yeah,
just don't remember
yeah, and it's very hard to feel kind of free if you're trying to just remember
remember.
the basic coordination of a sequence. I think that was part of it. And part of it was just I felt like, well, I already know what I want to do. And so I don't need input from
Wow.
someone.
So from quite a young age.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would,
Articulate.
articulate it like that at the time, but that was more of the feeling. I think it wasn't until I was about 18 or 19. Yeah, I realized that I wanted to be a performer, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to be an actor or a dancer. I was also really interested in music, but I didn't think that was what I wanted to do. But I was really interested in acting and in dancing, and I kind of gravitated towards dance in the end. And then I sort of realized, like, okay, or I thought anyway, if I want to do this, I need to like go to classes and learn material. So I did do that, and I slowly got much better at that. And then, yeah, eventually I went to the place, London Contemporary Dance School. Yeah, then I got really into classes and doing technique classes and really enjoyed it eventually. But I felt like I had to push myself through that because I felt like that was something I needed to do to get to where I wanted to go. Which, yeah, I mean, looking back, I sort of feel like, yeah, maybe, but I think there are loads of other ways I could have
Yeah.
become an artist, become a performer, but that's what I felt at the time.
And you still kept a bit connected to the acting world in a way because you're also a movement.
Yeah, I do a bit of movement directing in theatre, for plays. And then I'm also at the moment working with this theatre company, Forced Entertainment, which is, I mean, it's a very experimental
Yes, I saw
theatre
them on
company.
Instagram.
But yeah, they're actors, so I'm working with them. I guess, technically I'm an actor in that context. Yeah, so in the end, I guess I've sort of done both. But I guess the training that I decided to do and the world that I got into was mainly dance. And I think mainly I like dance because I like that it's about form, and it sort of has a relationship to abstraction, and I think it has more potential to be experimental than theatre, even though there is experimental theatre, obviously. But I think it tends to be more intuitive. It's more about sensation and responding to the present through sensation. Whereas I feel like theatre is often about somebody writing a text first, or even if it's not that, it's kind of comes from a place of thinking a lot, which, yeah, is interesting, but it's sort of less interesting than kind of getting into a room and kind of moving and seeing what happens. I feel like that kind of excites me. It's not that it's less interesting. I feel like I think there's more potential in working like that. I mean, there's obviously like incredible theatre and theatre writers and directors and performers. It's not that I'm not like saying it's not as good, but I just think like...
So maybe a different kind of embodiment. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
bit like set material. You have to
Yeah.
first...
Yeah. Yeah, you have to learn it. Yeah,
and
make
then
it
you
and
can
learn
let
it.
it go. But
Yeah.
and how do you find teaching to like professional and non-professional? And
Yeah, it's funny. I wasn't really interested in teaching when I was studying. I sort of thought, oh, I can see that most dancers do teach at some point in their careers. And I was like, oh, I don't know about that, but I guess I'll have to. But I didn't feel very interested. And I think partly because, yeah, I guess I didn't really have a frame of reference for the kind of teaching that I now do. I sort of thought like, oh, well, teaching is mainly like teaching technique or teaching sequences. And I was like, oh, that's not my favorite thing. I felt quite far away from who I was.
yeah,
And then the people that I knew at the time who taught improvisation were mainly, if not all, people who were very involved with contact improvisation, which I really liked, but I didn't feel like that was my sort of expertise. Kind of from a technical point of view, I wasn't like amazing at like doing lifts and all of that kind of thing. So I didn't have a role model, I guess, as a teacher, really. And then probably also, I think a lot of people have this kind of, with teaching, it's like, oh, who am I to teach, or what do I know? So I think it was also that. But then, yeah, I was forced to teach as a dancer in companies, sort of having to lead company class and etc. So, and then when that happened, I was like, oh, actually, I love this. This is great. And I think to start with, I felt like it was like performing. I was like, I didn't feel like I knew what to do. So I was just pretending to be a teacher. That was how I sort of that's how I was able to access it. It felt like a kind of performance. And then I was like, oh, well, I actually am teaching. And then that kind of gave me sort of
so interesting.
confidence.
It happened to me in different jobs as well. First, I had to pretend
Yeah.
that I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
When I had no clue, and then
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and then quite soon you realize you actually can do it. That's kind of how I got into teaching. And yeah, how is it to teach?
And how is it to teach improvisation also, because everybody is so different?
Well, yeah, it's changed a lot. I think when I started teaching, less people were interested in improvisation. It felt a little bit more like a kind of niche or like separate space that was sort of a bit weird. It's not like that no one was interested, but I feel like now it feels much more like, well, that's something that you would need to know how to do if you're a dancer. It's like kind of a basic, I need upper body strength, I need flexibility, I need, core stability, and it would be good to know a bit about improvisation. Whereas I think when I started teaching, I met students who were like, what is the point of this? Yeah, I think what's changed as well, I would say like students, I mean, this is maybe sort of not a very positive thing to say. I would say students, but even like people in general, I feel like my sense is like people are a bit less focused. I think sometimes with groups you get, students, but it could also be adults, any kind of group. You get groups that are like, they talk a lot, or like they're very interested in each other, or there's some kind of dynamic where there's a kind of noise in the room. But I think what I notice now is more often than in the past is there's a sense of diffusion of focus. I think partly because of
distraction,
internet and phones. I think it's partly that. It's also, I think, lifestyle, because I think our lifestyles are more and more sort of complex in terms of like people having multiple jobs and and the sort of precarity of things, sort of not quite knowing if and when things are happening or where or so I think that creates a sort of space of like I don't know, I definitely feel that
I
of
felt
like
that also.
I'm
Yesterday
like
evening, I went to a tango class, and
yeah
it was my first class,
yeah
but I could feel like when I was with someone
yeah
that, I mean, depends who, of course, but
yeah
sometimes the person was very almost lightheaded, you know,
yeah
like
yeah
kind of here, but not so
yeah
present, maybe thinking about a lot of other things, which
yeah
can be fine as well. But
yeah yeah yeah
it
yeah
took more time to go down to the body
yeah
than.
yeah. So I think that I find challenging about teaching, and not always. Like sometimes that's not an issue at all, but it's more often than it used to be. And I think that's kind of the opposite type of headspace that you want for improvising.
Do you feel like you have to almost do more? Like,
Sometimes, yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it's also different because I feel like my relationship to improvisation and teaching it is evolved. So I guess I feel a bit more opinionated about improvisation than I used to be. I used to just be like, I really like improvisation. I'm just sort of interested in all of it and any type and all aspects. And now there's lots of sort of aspects of it that I sort of don't find very interesting. And I feel
do you
like,
have examples?
well, I guess I'm not super interested in theatre improvisation that's about kind of making up narratives between people. Like, I don't find that either kind of comic or naturalistic. It's not that I dislike it, but it doesn't really excite me. And I used to really be interested in jamming, like going to contact jams and jamming with musicians. And again, you know, probably if I went to a jam, I would enjoy it. But it's not something that I'm like, oh, I can't wait to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Mm-hmm.
things sort of shift, and I feel like I see people improvise a lot from teaching. So I feel like I can sort of predict what's going to happen, and that changes it a lot. Yeah, I think what I like more about teaching than I used to is I used to be really concerned that people were having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Not only because I wanted them to like me and come back to my class, but also I sort of felt like, oh, if people aren't having a good time, that will inhibit their creativity if
Yeah.
they're bored or if they're annoyed or confused. And I think that's true. But I also sort of feel like that's okay.
Yeah, I kind of see what you mean.
You know, that's just life. It doesn't mean that it's not a good experience for them if they're really struggling with something or if they hate it even.
And they probably will learn more
Yeah,
also sometimes if
yeah.
they are.
I think I understand more about how people learn than I did when I started teaching. So I feel more confident about that. And I sort of know people that I've taught, you know, now I could be like, oh, I know I taught that person 10 years ago or more, and I can see what they're doing now, and I can sort of feel like, oh, okay, I can see.
That's incredible.
So that's a very different thing than, you know, when you've only been teaching for 6 months.
Your baby.
You don't have those references.
Yeah.
I remember really enjoying teaching when I started, and I was like, oh, I want to teach a lot. And then, like, you know, as with most things, you kind of discover something you want to do it all the time. It's not possible to do it all the time. Like, I wanted to teach a lot and everywhere. And like, that takes a long time to build up the contacts and all of that. So, or it did in my case anyway. So I think for a while I felt frustrated that I wanted to be teaching more.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, then I've gone through periods where I feel like I was teaching a bit too much. So I feel like I've come through that as well now.
And was that like an issue because it was too much or because you didn't have time for other things than performing, choreographing?
I think it was more that I felt like sort of too much sort of repetition of the same thing more than not having time to do other things. And also like the number of people, you know, sort of teaching like over 200 people every week. Sort of that was the kind of a bit like I can't like process all these faces, and it's quite a lot. So I don't know if I can really be fully sort of present with these number of people. And yeah, I mean, I mainly teach students, dance students, and a little bit theatre students. And, that's quite a charged age, when you're in training. It's very intense and people are vulnerable and going through all kinds of things. So, yeah, working with a lot of those people. Emotions like in
you almost need to have a psychological degree or something to...
Yeah, so I sort of so that was sort of the feeling of it being a bit too much.
And around choreography, is there one work that you've did that you are really proud of, like something that really...
That's an interesting question.
Or that you learned a lot with?
Yeah, and, I think, well, every piece I feel like I learned a lot. I mean, the first piece that I made, it was called Mr. Lawrence, that I made in 2012. That was sort of mind-blowing. I felt like I sort of learned so many things and discovered so many things because it was the first piece. I mean, the first piece I made some pieces when I was a student, but the first piece I made in a professional context.
Did you feel like it was the same as teaching? You had to pretend a bit at the beginning?
No, actually. And I would say even now, I feel like I know what I'm doing in a different way with teaching. Like with teaching, I feel like probably I know how to teach. Maybe it's even stupid to compare, but I was going to say I feel like I know how to teach better than I know how to choreograph. But I think what I'm not sure about with teaching is almost like sometimes I'm like, I don't know what the point of this is. I guess like what people were thinking, like I can't quite gauge what the impact of this is. Whereas when I'm making a piece, I feel like I'm doing it for myself in a way. So I know what I want and I know if it's happening or not. In some ways, I feel like that's much clearer to me. I guess the piece that you saw, It Begins in Darkness, that was a different kind of process for me because I felt like I got much more support for that project than other things that I've done from institutions, but also from just people in general who were interested in it. And before it was finished, as we were making it, I felt like people were really interested in the idea and were really encouraging, much more so than on other projects that I've done, I think.
And how did that feel?
Yeah, that was great. I mean, I think just before, the pandemic, sort of 2019, beginning of 2020, I sort of felt like respected, I guess, as an artist. I think I felt like I was respected as a performer before then and as a teacher as well, I guess, definitely. But as a kind of both my choreographic and my improvisation practice, it's not that people disrespected it, but I felt like, and maybe I'm wrong, but the feeling I had was that quite a lot of people were like unconvinced.
Yeah, I see.
And maybe that's not true, and maybe they still are. So I don't know what people, you never know what people feel. Yeah, it's not about people liking or not liking the work, but I felt like around that time, it's like, oh, this is a person who does these things and they have experience and they know what they're doing in a way that I didn't get that feeling from the universe before then. So that's something that really shifted. And I think, particularly with that project, It Begins in Darkness, I was sort of operating in a different space with that.
Did you feel like it was a bit maybe more pressure as well to have almost more respect? So then you...
Not really. I mean, there's always pressure, definitely, but I didn't experience it as more. I felt like the opposite, really. I felt more like
Okay, now I
Yeah.
can go and do my
Yeah.
things.
And I felt like also having more time and more money, because we did the show. I mean, we premiered that show in Bristol and then we did it at the place. And I don't know, like there's something about showing your work or performing at the place. It feels very kind of like, I don't know, for me anyway, it feels very sort of like loaded and
You
it's,
trained there also.
yeah, I train there and it's sort of like a kind of very busy venue in London. And it's, I think, I also feel like there's a bit of you can get a kind of audience where people are like, oh, okay, so this is being programmed here. Let's go and see if it's any good. So it just feels, and just also that I know that I will know a lot of people in the audience. So that always feels kind of pressured, but I didn't actually feel very pressured when we did the show at the place because I felt like, well, I made the show that I wanted to make and I think the dancers are going to do a great job. So, I didn't experience it as a pressure. I felt, more kind of trust, I think.
That's nice.
Yeah.
And do you have inspirations?
Um,
Choreographers or even writers?
yeah, a lot. Loads.
Can you give us a little?
Probably too many to mention. Andrew Morrish, I think that was kind of a big sort of catalyst moment. Similarly, but maybe in a bit of a different way, working with Deborah Hay. Or I say working with, like doing workshops with Deborah Hay. That was also kind of a really big thing for me. Yeah, I just really like how she works, and that really influenced me. Trying to think exactly how. I think I really liked doing her practice. I improvise a lot, and it felt really different to that. I think that, like, my approach to improvisation is kind of opening up sort of more and more possibilities all the time, like trying to kind of free up and open up space. And I would say her practice is really about kind of refining and finding some sort of essential quality or movement or state. So that's very different to how I work. So I really like that. And it's also very strange and weird, and sort of inexplicable what her work, which I love that. And I guess similarly with, as I'm speaking, I think there's something quite, although the work itself is different, I think those qualities are kind of quite similar to working with forced entertainment that I'm working with at the moment. Yeah, they have been a big inspiration for me. Yeah, and working with them, it's really, again, that kind of thing of like really looking for some sort of essence, which is, just so not how I work. I'm kind of like into just sort of opening everything up and trying everything. And they're really about kind of like, okay, so what exactly is this? What is the kind of heart of something? So I really like that. But I guess that's interesting because I'd sort of seen their work and knew about them for a long time before meeting them or working with them. So that's kind of an unusual experience for me. I haven't had that with anyone else, I don't think. Yeah, inspired is maybe not the right word, but I've definitely got quite a lot from watching shows that I don't like and working with people whose practices I really don't like, because I'm like, okay, that's the opposite of what I want to do. And then I sort of know, like, okay, so I don't want to do that. So that means I want to do this. So I found that really as useful as sort of meeting people and seeing things that I'm like, oh, that's amazing. Also kind of things where I'm like, no, that's terrible.
It's quite important actually to
Yeah,
do those, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. I mean, yeah. Some experiences I sort of, in a way, regret, but also I did get a lot out of them in terms of like knowing that that's not how I want to work.
That's good.
But I would say these days I'm like as inspired by other art forms, music. I'm obsessed with music.
Do you play an
Films.
instrument? Or?
Not really. I used to play the piano and I used to sing, or I would say I occasionally, intermittently sing. But I listen to a lot of music and also films, reading, visual art. So I find all of that just as sort of inspiring as going to see a dance show. And then also I get inspired a lot by like working with people and teaching. Teaching is sort of, I feel like that's been a really big resource for my choreographic practice and my improvisation practice, sort of seeing people in the studio doing things and trying stuff out. In teaching, that's been super useful and still is. I guess in terms of like choreography, something that I think is difficult is, my ideal situation of making a show would be like, I know who's in it and we've got some rehearsals and that's it. That would be my ideal starting point for a piece. And then, maybe it will end up being completely choreographed. And I occasionally get to do that if I work with students to make a piece. So sometimes, it depends. Sometimes the school or whatever, the institution will be like, so we need you to write something for the students about what you're going to do with them. But sometimes they don't at all. It's just like, here's some kids. Or they're not necessarily kids, but here's some students. You've got 2 weeks, or you've got 1 week or 5 weeks or whatever it is. Make something. That's my ideal.
I love that. Yeah.
And then I feel like I like to sort of be in the space with people, just trying sort of anything, maybe something really simple, something really generic, first to kind of get to know what's going on. And then it feels like it's coming from the room rather than me coming in with an idea.
Yeah.
I guess I just like not knowing. That's kind of what interests me about making stuff. Whether or not it's an improvisation or a choreography, I want to not know what it is before, or even at the end, actually. Like, the mystery of it is kind of what interests me most.
Quite exciting.
And I get to also try that out in teaching, or I get a bit of a taste of that. I sort of propose something to the group and then they do something and it's not what I can't predict necessarily what that is going to be. And then that feels like a generative space. I think also sometimes what I find with teaching is, I don't know, like you often get these sort of situations where you're like, oh, okay, I didn't expect that. Like half the people are not here, or you've actually got both groups together, or it's only half an hour today, or, these sorts of, and then it's like, oh, okay, I have to kind of completely just improvise. And that's very exciting. Yeah, not always. Sometimes it's really annoying, but it can be really exciting.
If you're in a good place,
it depends. Like sometimes, I guess it's annoying when it feels like it's sort of disrespectful. Like it's like, well, actually, this isn't a respectful situation to me or the students.
Yeah.
But sometimes it doesn't feel like that. And it just feels like, okay, now we have to like really
like a challenge.
Be present and figure out what to do. And then I feel like I take that into a making process.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Beautiful. Let's finish with the little random questions at the end. Do you prefer silence or small talk?
Oh. When you said, before you said small talk, I was going to say silence. I feel like I'm recently, like I'm just super interested in silence. Yeah. but small talk now that when you said small talk, I'm like, oh, I quite like that. I like as a creative idea, small talk sounds interesting. But in like general life, I feel like I'm getting more and more interested in silence.
Do you like to go to the supermarket?
Yeah, I do actually. We do quite a lot of online shopping lately. I think if I feel like I have time, I like it. If I'm in a rush, I don't enjoy it.
And would you plan it? Would you make a list?
Yeah. I think I think that sort of, if it's like, oh, I'm on the way home and I think I've got to pick this up, and then I don't find it very exciting. But if I'm like, oh, okay, I've got time and I know what I want, then yeah, I do quite like it. Yeah.
And if you could have dinner with anyone alive or dead?
Oh, wow. Gosh. Uh, I watched a film recently about Brian Eno, a composer, producer, which was really great. And I did feel like, oh, I'd like to meet this person. And yeah, I do know someone who knows him. So it's not like,
There's a seed somewhere.
a fantastical idea. But I think that's the most recent time where I was like, oh, I'd really like to meet this person.
And if you could live a parallel life? So you still have your life, but you have another life. What do you do?
That sounds fun. Hard to choose one thing. I don't know. I know at one point I would have said, yeah, these are probably not really things I would like to do, or even be good at. But I definitely at one point like had a fantasy about being a film critic.
Oh.
And then totally different would be working in an animal sanctuary.
So you can have two parallel lives.
Yeah. Or maybe both. Maybe do, I don't know. Do both, yeah, in my parallel life, part-time.
And if you have one day to live, what do you do?
One day to live. Part of me thinks I would just not do anything.
That's nice.
You know, just like go and sit in a park and like just watch the world go by. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we do too much, sort of running around, and it's like a sense of like, oh, I should be doing more. I've got,
urgency.
or maybe we've got a lot of things to do, or we want to do things, or we're feeling like we haven't done enough, or there's sort of both real and imagined pressures that we all have, and I think like, yeah, how cool if you just didn't feel any of that and you were just like, oh, I'm just gonna like go for a walk without a destination, or just gonna sit in a field. I think that, yeah, if I cut off all the kind of responsibilities, I think that's what I would be left with, probably.
And do you have any project for the future that you want to share here?
Well, quite a few. Don't know if I need to share them all. But yeah, back to reality.
Sorry.
So I'm making a new show, which is called The Last Quartet, which is a dance piece that I'm in, performing with 3 other dancers and a musician, which we will premiere next year. So that's the new next show that I'm making. And then also touring, performing these long solo improvisations. So I've been doing solo improvisations for a long time, but since 2021 I started doing hour-long ones. Before then I'd only ever, the longest were, I did quite a lot of half an hour performances, and then I upped it to an hour. So that's which is very different, really. It's a very different kind of thing. So that's the other thing that I'm trying to make happen. And yeah, that's probably enough of those are the sort of the most concrete things that
Nice.
those are the sort of immediate things that I'm working on.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Seke, for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Really nice to have you.